Hello, everyone. I came across some pretty interesting news, specifically this article that basically tells us that the illusion that our leading politicians of this country, as well as the media, basically working in cooperation with each other to spin this narrative that we've been seeing such consistency of the proxy war in Ukraine, that it isn't going the same way, basically, outside the walls of the US of A. And I'll read you the title of the article, this Newsweek article, and it basically tell you everything you need to know. Nearly 90% of the world isn't following us on Ukraine. Now, I'm not going to read this entire thing, because if I were to sit here and read this entire thing, it'd be pretty lengthy, and I don't want that to consume the majority of the video. But I'll preface this before I read just a little bit of it by saying we've been getting such a consistent theme in the media censorship and the derailment of prominent figures that have different things to say about specifically the war in Ukraine, that our government seems so adamant on prolonging, and many other things, of course, but specifically this, they have been deplatformed. Anyone that has a differing opinion from the State Department or the leading politicians or the media, they're shunned. They're cast away as Russian agents or Kremlin allies or whatever the hell they're being called nowadays. And you get this sense of quote unquote unity. Biden and many other politicians have been saying, the world is unified on this issue. We're all together here. Well, they're specifically referencing what constitutes the West, Japan, and that's basically it. But I'll get into a little bit of this article because it's extremely interesting, and I'll link it down below if you want to take a look at it. Our familiar system of global political and economic alliances is shifting, and nothing has made this change clearer than the varied reactions to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While the United States and its closest allies in Europe and Asia have imposed tough economic sanctions on Moscow, 87% of the world's population has declined to follow us. Economic sanctions have united our adversaries in shared resistance. Less predictably, the outbreak of Cold War II has also led countries that were once partners or non-aligned to become increasingly multi-aligned. Nowhere is the shift more apparent than in energy markets where, unlike the currencies, governments cannot simply print what they need. Here, the web of sanctions become a sieve. Saudi Arabia, a long-committed American partner, has established a close alliance with Russia in the OPEC Plus cartel. The Saudis have very publicly declined the request of an American president to increase oil production and said they imported Russian oil for domestic use to export more of their own production. Last week, they even reduced production and made clear they may do so again. China is selling Europe liquid natural gas that originated in Siberia while importing Russian oil at the same time. It then refines and exports the oil. Meanwhile, kept solvent by Chinese oil purchases, Iran has become the largest customer of Russian wheat. India's petroleum minister has stated publicly that his government has no conflict with Moscow and a moral duty to keep down energy prices at home by buying Russian oil. Alliances that were created in part to counter Western economic and political influence are expanding. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey have announced their interest in joining the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization currently links China, Russia, India, and Pakistan, among others. Iran plans to join this month, while Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are likely to become dialogue partners or candidate members. Now, I'll just stop there, but this article goes on to talk about how, a large majority of the world isn't following the sanction program that the U.S. and the European allies has imposed on the Russian economy, aimed at crippling it, which it hasn't done. Of course, as we've seen, they also talk about in this article how the global South, the anti-Western opinion or sentiment in the global South is rising. Of course, as I read there in that article, it very astutely pointed out, Saudi Arabia isn't being the lapdog to the U.S. that it once was. You have India, who has, I believe, the second largest population in the world that's actually set to surpass China soon, is the biggest oil purchaser from Russia. The difference in between countries like India, China, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries that have a differing opinion on the war in Ukraine is that they don't see it as a moral obligation to protest Russia and other enemy states that the U.S. decides that they don't currently like at the moment, simply because it's morally correct to do. No, they don't have such a plain, misguided view of the world. No, they look around, and specifically in India's case, they would like to, keep up their energy, integrity, as they phrase it so often, and do right, seemingly, by their own populations. Of course, this falls on deaf ears as it pertains to the West and the U.S. as they pop forward with their ridiculous policies while beating up on their people with inflations. Of course, the reverberations from the sanction program that are hurting us at home, and even more so the Europeans, who they've essentially sacrificed. Weaponization of the financial sector, the insurance companies, and the SWIFT system, stealing assets, taking away money, and all the rest of it, just simply because we don't like the policy of another nation, of course, one that you decided is an enemy. And people around the world are looking at this, and people are beginning to, talks are becoming more consistent about de-dollarizing and having a second, a third, a fourth option, turning to someone else, i.e. China, i.e. fill in the blank. Because to many people around the world, the U.S. can no longer be trusted. And they are extremely right. And this didn't just occur. This is something that has been brewing and stirring up for quite some time. As one of the biggest examples you can point to is the decimation in the Middle East that the U.S. played the biggest role in, basically setting it on fire for the past couple of decades. The rest of the world sees these things, but the propaganda is so thick and the media censorship is so wild and rampant that most Americans aren't even aware of this. They just see what they see on Fox or CNN, and they think that their country is acting for the greater good always and will be forever. But articles like this that contain extremely vital information show us that the sentiment outside the walls of this country is indeed very much different.